Hello everyone, and welcome to Fara's Carry Guide. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at dealing with air superiority. This is mostly a classroom lesson with the WoW's Tactics Training Planner, but we're going to cover topics such as are you a strike setup? Or do you have any fighters? Are you balanced setup Japanese? The main topic with air superiority we're dealing with is when the enemy carrier has more fighter waves than you do, or his fighter planes are stronger than yours. For example, 2 Lexington fighters versus 2 Shokaku fighters. What can you do to give yourself an advantage, to make yourself still effective during the battle so you're not completely locked out? There are a number of things we want to look at, such as spreading the enemy planes apart, making opportunity for us to bomb the enemy ships, rather than perhaps going straight up for an offensive game as we might normally do, going after enemy ships. We want to be more scouting focused, making sure the enemy can see with our dive bombers, which are faster than enemy fighters, and maybe try and spread them out and get some bombing hits in. So with that being said, let's go into our WoW's Tactics training room and have a look. So here we are, and in this first example, we, the green carrier, are playing a balanced setup Japanese carrier, so we're playing either a Hiryu or Shokaku, and the enemy carrier, in this particular example, has an extra fighter compared to us. Now, it could be a fighter Hiryu Shokaku, or for example, we could be playing tier 7s, and it could be an enemy Saipan with 3 fighters to our 2. Now, we do not necessarily want to fight unless we have some spectacular strafes. We're going to lose. He has more strafing capabilities, he has more ability to lock and then strafe in, he can lock in and then go for the bomber. It's not great for us. We want to be able to attack because we've got good bombers and we want to go after this guy's battleship or other ships. In this particular scenario, when I am in a situation where the enemy has more fighters than me. Now, this could be, as we said, Saipan versus Hiryu, a fighter setup Shokaku Hiryu versus ourselves in a Hiryu Shokaku, or it could be fighter Taiho versus our Taiho. It could be fighter Essex Midway, where they have 2 or 3 fighters to your 1 or 2, depending on the tier you are. You've got a number of planes. In this particular instance, as soon as I find out what wave setup the enemy carrier is, I'll use the dive bombers, I'll drop their payload, and they'll fly off the flanks and they'll start scouting. I am looking around the map, I'm basically spotting, and I'm trying to make myself visible, and then I'll also might even fly around and start spotting the enemy carrier. Dive bombers that have dropped their payload are faster than the enemy fighters, and this is kind of true. It's a little bit sticky for the tier 7 setup when the Saipan has very fast fighters compared to your dive bombers. In a straight race, he will very slowly catch you, so you want to just basically run away to friendly A as much as you can. But for every other tier and every other matchup, you should be able to avoid the enemy fighters. In this scenario, we're going to use our dive bombers to maybe scout an enemy destroyer, or just helping our team as we learn in Advanced Scouting Tactics in episode 6.4. But the goal here is to try and lure the enemy carrier to go after your planes. He's going fighter setup, he wants to kill some of your planes. We're not going to engage him in a fighter duel, there's no point. Our main damage dealing will be from our torpedo bombers. Our fighters are going to be protecting our torpedo bombers, and we're going to use our dive bombers to try and lure away the enemy fighters. If the enemy carrier takes the bait and even just lures one wave off because you're spotting him and he doesn't like being spotted, or his planes are out of position from our target that we want to hit, we could shuffle over to the destroyer and choose to cross drop him. Does he move his fighters over to protect him? He does. Alright, we'll just move back again. Does he then move back to the battleship? Does he see where your planes are? Is he still loitering around the destroyer, and is he out of position with just one fighter? Well, let's move back over friendly lines. If we get an opportunity where his extra fighter is out of position, or is chasing a dive bomber, or is not in a position to protect the target that you want to attack, at that point we can commit our fighters, and then we can commit our torpedo bombers and go for the attack. Now, we're not going to be able to stack flooding, we're not going to be stacking fires like we've learned in advanced bombing techniques in previous episodes. What we are wanting to do is damage. The enemy carrier, by going fighter, cannot output the same damage you can by going strike or by balance in the Japanese ships. You just have more capability because you've got the second torpedo bomber squadron. So we want to hurt this battleship. Maybe we're going after a battleship that's wounded, that's crippled, is currently fighting other battleships. Maybe he's fighting a friendly battleship and we want to help our guy in this kind of fight a battleship duel. Well, we want to manipulate our planes, flying back and forth between other targets, luring other fighters away with our dive bombers, providing scouting information, and then when the opportunity presents itself, we go in for the attack. So it's a measured degree of patience, using friendly ships with their friendly AA, it's trying to spread out the enemy fighters, and then looking for an opportunity and going for the attack. Now, this tactic works if you yourself have fighters, because you can engage the reduced fighter count or any fighters to go for the target. What do you do if you're an American strike carrier? Well, in this particular instance, you have no fighters, and it's quite frustrating. There are some things you can do. You can use friendly AA over friendly AA cruiser, makes a no-fly zone for enemy fighters that he doesn't want to go into, so that gives us a sort of fallback point. And we have to be flexible in our approach. If the enemy carrier only has 2 fighters, that's great. If he has 3 fighters, it's just going to make things a little bit more difficult. For this example, we'll assume he has 2. In larger maps, the carrier player, that's the hostile red team carrier, cannot be everywhere at once. So what we can do is we can either choose to try and stay hidden and attack a ship with everything we have if we know the enemy fighters are out of position and we can see them and he can't intercept us. Or if the enemy carrier is constantly bouncing back and forth and following our bombers, choose to split up. Either send 1 dive bomber myself or 1 dive bomber, 1 torpedo bomber, and then 2 dive bombers off, or just split it up entirely into 3 separate groups. The goal here is we are trying to spread out the enemy fighters as much as possible. If we have our single dive bomber going for 1 target, and the fighter's latching onto him, that's fine. We can get through the middle. Perhaps we go down and we want to attack this battleship. There's only a single fighter then if we spread them out. If both his fighters are here, we want to spread the bombers out again and go for separate targets. If his fighters has split up and he's chasing after you, pay attention to the bombers. The only way he's going to make a meaningful distance to your bombers is you can lure them. If you see a fighter chasing your bomber and you think you can get a hit, go for the hit. If not, lure it away from the other bombers on the other side of the map so his flight time is exceptionally long on the return flight. Pay attention to the bomber. If he's going to come down and do a strafe on you from behind, you can duke, as we've spoken about in kind of advanced fire control. You can duke off to the side or you can double back so that he wastes one of his 3 strafes, that's the enemy fighter, and you might not lose all the planes. So you're basically just wasting as much time as you can with this bomber, maybe getting some hits in, especially with an American dive bomber, even though the panic effect on the dive bombers from the fighter plane, if he tags it, you can still get some damage in. If the fighters are out of position, you can maybe use the torpedo bombers on the destroyer. Maybe you can get some torpedo bombers on the battleship. But the overriding issue here is you have to read the map, read where the enemy distribution is, look for targets of opportunity, anyone that's isolated, spread out, and depending how many fighter waves the enemy fighter is, you're going to have to spread your bombers out and duke the barrages, strafes, that type of thing, and just stretch the carrier so that you can then go for any target of opportunity and do damage. Any damage that you do is a positive. You're already at a disadvantage. I mean, if the enemy carrier isn't doing protecting of his fleet, that's great. That's fine. But you have to be aware that this is difficult for the most part. If you're playing a competent player, and if you're playing a good enemy carrier player, you need to stretch them out. You need to spread them out. You need to control your planes so they don't get easily strafed. Last thing you want is this 1 dive bomber off, get 1 strafe, he dies, and he's immediately coming back to pounce on your remaining planes. No, you have to pay attention to all of the waves, pay attention to where his fighters, and try and do some duking and that type of stuff to try and stay alive. I think that's everything for dealing with air supremacy, like an air superiority. The goal is not to, in either setup, whether you're the American strike carrier or where you're balanced, or whether the enemy carrier has gone fire setup because he can and you've gone balanced, the goal isn't win in this particular instance the fighter duel. If you're both balanced or you're both fighter setup, well then it's a fighter dancing duel and you're working to bleed off the enemy carrier's planes, keeping them blind and to kind of win the long game, and this can be more of an influence in ranked competitive games you're kind of playing with. But if you are outnumbered in terms of plane waves, then your fighters are being used in a defensive fashion, and you want to conserve them and not engage at any time unless you're over friendly AA. And conversely, if you're Strike and you're a Strike setup, maybe you're Strike into Ranger or you're Strike Lexington, the goal is to get any damage you possibly can out there. If this player's bad and you can get some easy hits, that's great. If the player's good, you need to stretch him out, make him flex, and then look for targets of opportunity and find cracks in his defense and get those hits in and see if you can't make a difference for your team. Right, that is dealing with air superiority. If you want to look for clips with regards to how to deal with air superiority, have a look at my YouTube channel. There is a playlist for clip examples, and you should be able to find a variety of clip examples for these classroom lessons. Our next episode will be how to deal with being bottom tier. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.